We appreciate all of the guests who have appeared on our show and sincerely thank them for providing you, our audience, with useful information. However, the advice our guests provide is theirs, and we encourage you to seek out a professional if you have specific questions about any topic we cover on the Crushing Debt podcast. On this week's episode of the Crushing Debt podcast, credit does not have to equal debt.
Welcome to the Crushing Debt Podcast with your host, Florida attorney Shawn, where our goal is to help you get rid of the financial bullies in your life.
So welcome back to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast. My name is Shawn, owner and founder of Yesner Law, and I not only have one, but I have two money coaches with me here today. So welcome, George.
What? It's surrounded. We have taken over.
Well, last week or a couple weeks ago, there were a couple attorneys in the office, so I think it's just fair play.
Yeah, once in a while, I gotta feel like I'm smart in the room. So yeah, please, thank you.
So how you doing, George? You get a lot of student loan debt forgiven?
Oh, I am amazed on how much that student loan debt has helped me out and helped my family, and yet I'm sending my daughter. We just sent my daughter to college. So obviously, we're trying to make sure we don't add to the debt that's out there in the country.
Well, if she can get in and graduate and get out fast enough, maybe you can get some of her debt forgiven.
That would be nice, but I think at this point she's kind of like, hey, can I just get through chemistry class, this week? So that seems to be the main thing this week.
Yeah, I am following up. I don't believe so. I'm going to date myself here. My student loans are so old that I don't think they qualify for any of the forgiveness that was recently announced.
Oh, I thought that was like a start of a joke there. My
student debts are so old. How old are they? No,
love it.
Joke's on me because I don't think I get any forgiven. I just got to keep paying them for the next 5 years.
No, that's good. That's good. Well, maybe we can coach you through that, my friend. Don't worry about it. We're here for you.
Thanks. No, I just put it on auto debit, set it and forget it, pay every month, and I think I got another about 5 years left, and then they're done. So we do have a guest that I want to get to this week as well. Before I get there, I want to talk about our sponsors, and so I've been talking about them for a while. The first sponsor. His name is Mark Purvis. He is the editor of the show, so he makes us sound really great because if you actually heard what we sound like as we're recording this, it would be a train wreck.
Wow.
So Mark helps us do really good, helps us sound really good, and he's got a company he's got a website called LegacySpotlight.com, and the whole purpose of LegacySpotlight.com is to record the stories that you want to pass down to your future generations, or if you've got older generations and you want to capture their stories. Mark's a Emmy Award-winning videographer. He's got over 20 years experience. He'll come out, he'll make it fun, he'll have the equipment, the recording equipment, all that kind of stuff. And so definitely go to LegacySpotlight.com and contact Mark, and he will capture your stories there. But I do want to get to our guest this week. So he grew up in a military family. He understands the financial struggles of young enlisted families, which motivated him to help them get out of a paycheck-to-paycheck lifestyle and enjoy a better financial life. He's been a consumer credit expert for almost 2 decades, helping thousands of families realize the goal of home ownership. Credit requires more of a strategy than most people think, and he is a master at helping clients create a strategy by refocusing on what they're trying to accomplish, gaining control of their credit and finances, and creating a plan to impact credit and achieve their goals. He's the owner of 12 Point Life, and he provides leadership in managing financial operations and collaborates with all facets of an organization to create better financial decisions. He currently resides in Plano with his wife, Leanne, and is proud to be a U.S. Army veteran. And thank you so much for your service. Welcome our guest, David Dishman. Welcome, David.
Hey, thanks, Shawn. All of that made me sound like really, really smart or something. like I've been doing this for a while.
And I made it up on the spot. Can you believe that? So I do want to give out your contact information real quick, but we'll mention it a couple times. It'll be in the notes here as well. But if you want to contact David, it is david@omegamoneycoach.com, exactly how it sounds. David@omegamoneycoach.com. Got a couple of questions for you, all kind of surrounding credit. Use of credit cards, credit scores, credit repair. I mean, I guess maybe one of the ways to start is, typically when I'm talking to clients about bankruptcy or even about getting out of debt, even if we can avoid bankruptcy, their biggest question, their biggest concern is always, well, how's that going to impact my credit? And sometimes I want to say to them, there's no way, unless you pay this debt off in full, there's no way that you're going to get out of it and preserve your credit. Your credit is going to take some level of a hit, whether that's 2 points or 200 points. It's going to take some kind of hit. Let's not worry about credit now. Let's get rid of the debt. And then once we get rid of the debt, we can then work on repairing the credit. What are your thoughts?
No offense, Shawn, I'm not a huge fan of bankruptcy, but I do understand that it serves a purpose. Okay. And what a lot of people don't realize going into it is that, there are certain things that just can't be discharged in bankruptcy. There are certain things that it doesn't make sense to file a bankruptcy for. If I've got collection accounts on there here in the state of Texas, if the debt is more than 4 years old, it's outside the statute of limitations for debt collection. I can't be sued for it. So what? Okay, it's already there. I don't need bankruptcy protection. But there are a ton of times when bankruptcy does make sense because, business deals go awry or there's some type of claim against you for a huge amount that you're never going to get out from underneath. And that's when that bankruptcy protection becomes more important.
Yeah.
As far as the impact to the credit, believe it or not, filing bankruptcy, if you're in that position, it can actually help you a little. And the reason for that is that most people don't realize is that when an account is included in bankruptcy, it has about 50% of the impact on your credit than it did when it was showing as, revolving constant 90, 120 day late payments. As far as how long it can stay on there, Chapter 13 will stay on your credit, can stay on your credit for up to 7 years from discharge. Chapter 7 will stay on for 10 years.
Yeah, and I've said many times on the show, and I've tried to be real clear about this, that bankruptcy isn't always the best tool. Bankruptcy isn't always the only tool. I've told plenty of people bankruptcy doesn't work for you for this reason or that reason. And like you said, that here in Florida, it's a 5-year statute of limitations. And if a judgment's actually entered, it's a 20-year statute of limitations. So that judgment survives for 20 years. Certainly, I agree with you. There are situations where bankruptcy is a good idea. There's situations where bankruptcy is a bad idea. I've heard, however, that even though bankruptcy may be on your credit 7 years, 10 years, whatever it may be, the impact of that bankruptcy is really what we're more focused on. So sometimes people can, 2-3 years out of a Chapter 7 can finance a house. Now, they're not going to get 4% or 6% or whatever the low interest rate is today. They're not going to get that absolute lowest interest rate. But within 2, 3, 4 years of getting their discharge, even though it's on their credit, they can still buy a house. The credit card companies know you can only file once every 8 years. And so if you're one day out of a bankruptcy, you may get credit card offers because they know they got you for the next 8 years. So it's not just that it's on the credit, it's what's the impact on the credit.
And with with most mortgages after discharge, it's 2 years out of discharge or 1 year on some programs with a really good written letter of explanation. For example, I've worked with this guy who, the COVID situation shut down everything.
Something happened? What did I miss something? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly.
a little bug, a little cold.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. But he was able to file bankruptcy, get through it real fast. So now he'll be coming up in December on a year, and he'll be able to qualify for a mortgage, a year out of discharge because a pretty solid letter of explanation. The whole world shut down during COVID. The odds of that happening again,
please.
Knock on wood, So, that letter of explanation does help. Now, if you're considering or if you need to go through bankruptcy, one thing that I would do is I would look at, okay, what is my oldest credit card? And is that something that I can keep open with a zero balance and not include that particular item in the bankruptcy and not claim that in the bankruptcy and let it sit there with a zero balance, charge, $10, $15 a month on it And if that's a possibility when you're filing the bankruptcy, that is absolutely what I would do, because that will help you to recover from the bankruptcy that much faster.
Right.
Yeah. Typically, we only have to include in the bankruptcy those cards that you owe money on. So I agree. If it is a zero balance, we don't necessarily have to list it in the bankruptcy schedules. Now, there's a comment there that I don't want clients to misunderstand and say, well, I've got this $2,000 credit card. I'm going to throw $2,000 at it and pay it down to zero and then file, because there is also something called preferential treatment. You're not allowed to pay off one card and then bankrupt another. The trustee is going to say, well, wait a minute, why are you giving one a preference over the other? But if the balance is zero or close to zero, or the minimum payment will get you to zero, then yeah. Now, some credit card companies will see that you filed because the filing is tied to your Social Security number. So some credit card companies will see that you filed and cancel that zero balance card anyway. So that is still a risk. But I kind of want to start to shift away from bankruptcy, because what I think you're getting at, David, is how a credit score is calculated. And one of those factors there is length of credit. And that's why people get confused a lot of times, that if they close an old credit card, their score goes down because they have less length to their credit, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, that's not a huge factor in your credit score, but the length of history does impact, so when you look at what makes up the score, okay, the biggest single piece is your payment history. So that's going to include, are you paying your bills on time? Is stuff going to collection? Do you have any liens or judgments? What are you doing to make sure that you pay your bills? That's 35% of your credit score. The second biggest is going to be credit utilization ratio. And I'm sure we're going to come back to this later, but I'll just briefly say that credit utilization ratio is just a fancy way of saying, what are the balances in relationship to the credit limit? Right. Okay. And that's on all of your accounts. Okay. So if you have a brand new installment loan, you're going to be pretty much at 100% credit utilization ratio, because, the credit limit when you opened up that installment loan was $10,000, and the balance that you owe is $10,000. With a credit card, if you have that credit limit at $10,000, you want the balance to be under 10% of the credit limit, so below $1,000. Anyone who's ever heard me talk about credit or debt knows that one of the main topics that I try to emphasize over and over and over is that good credit does not have to equal debt. And that's where people get confused, is because they go out and open up all these different accounts, because to have a perfect credit score, you have to have a good, what they call credit mix. Now, that credit mix only makes up 10% of your credit score. Okay. So a credit mix, to have a perfect score, you got to have a mortgage and some installment loans and some credit cards and some retail cards. And all of these things, you got to have at least, 6 or 7 different types of trade lines. I'd rather have just good credit, which means I've got, 2 or 3 credit cards, maybe a mortgage. And even with just 2 or 3 credit cards, I can still have a score in the 700s. That's fine with me. To me, a car payment is the single biggest detractor to wealth that there is. I talked to someone yesterday who, by all accounts, makes a good living, doesn't know where his money's going. He's got a $2,000 a month car payment.
Jeez.
Okay.
Buy a second house for that.
Exactly. That's a depreciating asset. COVID aside, typically a vehicle loses value the minute you drive it off the lot.
Right.
Okay.
So he's driving around in a space shuttle? Is that what's
a Land Rover.
Oh, wow.
Land Rover. Wow.
Yeah.
Is it gold plated or? Jeez.
So that makes up 10%, the credit mix.
Right.
New credit makes up 10%. So when you open up a new account, it's going to have a negative impact on your score, because it's how many new accounts are you opening up in the last 2 years? Okay, that makes up 10%. And then that longevity of how long you've been in the bureaus, that makes up 15%. And as an example, just because I've been in the system and I have credit cards that are older than Shawn, I'm going to have better credit, because I've been in the system for that much longer, because I'm, some old dude that, has been around. Okay?
I know you'd be surprised how long I've been around, but
29-year-old whippersnappers.
I was just trying to make you look good, Shawn.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. Somebody said, we were in a meeting today, and somebody said, yeah, and if so-and-so raises X amount of dollars, he's going to shave his head. And I said, why is that a punishment?
Exactly.
I don't understand that. So, yeah, so credit score, and we've talked a lot about how credit score impacts different things, and how some people understand it, some people don't understand it. A lot of people get confused by it, but then that sort of leads into this realm of credit repair. And I know there's a ton of, for lack of a better word, scam artists in the credit repair industry. So what if someone says, well, my credit did take a little bit of a beating, and I want to try to make it better? What are some things they should look out for?
Okay, so I will tell you that I understand that there are bad actors in the credit repair world. In fact, my wife was so excited when I started doing coaching, because then when we went to school functions, I could say I was a financial coach instead of a credit repair specialist. Okay, that whole credit repair stigma, it's there for a reason. And part of the reason is that credit repair goes largely unregulated. Okay, now that doesn't mean that it isn't regulated, because there's actually a law out there called CROA, the Credit Repair Organization. And unfortunately, most people who sell credit repair programs either don't know about CROA or don't care. Okay, for 20 years, we have been largely CROA compliant, and we just, look, we're not going to promise you the sun and the moon. We're going to tell you what you really need to do, what those expectations should be. If someone is considering credit repair because they're overwhelmed, they need to look at, okay, what is it that I'm trying to accomplish first? Okay, so that goes back to that refocus on what's important. What am I trying to accomplish? And then it's a matter of gaining control of your finances. Okay, where is every dollar going? Where is every dollar coming from? How can I manage that and keep a roof over my head, keep the utilities on, a car in the driveway so I can preferably get to and from work, that kind of thing. And then you create a plan on how am I going to achieve my goals. You should not be looking at your credit in a vacuum. It should be part of your overall financial health. I've actually been kicked out of a couple of Facebook groups because, there's this radio personality who is just completely anti-credit and considers it an I love debt score. And I think that in this situation, he's missing the mark. Credit is not evil. It's how you use credit, how you manage your credit that can cause the issues. And when you have a whole army of financial coaches out there that are endorsed by this radio personality, and they all draw the line, and instead of educating their clients on how to use credit responsibly to your benefit, I think you're doing people a disservice.
I think I understand where they're coming from, this army. But I get, what I'm saying? So David, I think the thing we're going to ask too is kind of like, we know what we need to do. I guess the question though is, why is it so difficult for people to have that balance between having credit that works for them and then, again, easily falling into this debt hole that could be created when using our credit and our debt?
That question, you need to get a shrink on the line on the podcast.
We'll call him in.
Because it's really that it's more of a psychological, behavioral. It's a instant gratification. It's the marketing from Madison Avenue for the last 60 years. People watching Mad Men and all of the advertisements that are out there that say, you deserve this now, you deserve this now. We make it so easy. One of the things that really struck me when I was in the military is every military base that I was at, when you pull off base, you see right off base, tote the note lots, buy it here, pawn shops, cash advance places. And they target the military because they know that enlisted people get paid on the 1st and the 15th. And if they lend an enlisted person money and the soldier doesn't pay, all they got to do is call their CO. their commanding officer.
Impact on credit, I know in the military, can impact your ability to be promoted.
It can impact your ability to be promoted. More importantly, it can impact your ability to qualify for and maintain a security clearance.
Right.
Wow.
So that's a huge deal. So to jump back real quick before I went off on a tangent and address what am I looking for in a credit repair company? Are they charging an upfront fee? Upfront fees are illegal. You cannot charge in advance for credit repair. Okay, just plain and simple. And that's one of the biggest complaints that I get from people is they call and they say, well, I went with this other company and I paid them $1,500 or $2,000 in advance, and then I never got them on the phone again.
Oh.
They didn't do what they said they were going to do.
Right.
Okay. It is illegal to charge upfront fees for credit repair. It is written in CROA. Where some of the confusion comes in is like in the state of Texas. The state of Texas says that if you have a bond on file with the state, you can charge in advance for credit repair. Federal law, Shawn, you're the attorney. How many times is state law going to trump federal law?
Yeah, not too often, if at all ever.
So I know a couple of companies here in the Texas area where eventually the Federal Trade Commission and more recently the CFPB have come down on them. And CFPB is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, for anyone who doesn't know that. But they've come down on credit repair companies for charging in advance. So that's your first big red sign. Second big red flag is, are they making promises that are unrealistic? Look, you got yourself into this mess. It took you however long, 6 years, 12 years to screw up your credit this bad to now, where you're looking for help right now. You can't expect reasonably, logically, ethically that someone is going to fix all of that in 30 days. In fact, we tell clients that you're not even going to get your first responses from the bureaus for about 45 days. The same federal law that allows us to investigate, to validate, to verify what's on your credit report, that's the same law that gives the bureaus an opportunity to conduct what they call a reasonable investigation. So you've got that timeline. So
you're saying those companies that say they can get a bankruptcy off your credit report the day after your discharge, they're being unrealistic? just a little bit, man. Now, look, it doesn't mean that it can't be done, okay? Because federal law says that anything that's on your credit report has to be 100% complete, accurate, timely, and verifiable. The absence of any of that criteria makes it subject to either deletion or correction. We have the manual that companies are supposed to use when reporting to the bureaus. And we should go through and we go item by item and say, okay, for this particular type of account, these are the specific fields that are required to be filled out. This is what makes it complete. This is what makes it accurate. If the information isn't complete, it's not accurate. If it's not accurate, it cannot be on your credit report, because the bureaus are supposed to provide an accurate representation of who you are as a credit risk. And if they're reporting inaccurate, incomplete information, that's not an accurate representation of who you are as a credit risk. One of the red flags that I've always cautioned people about, and I don't know if this is necessarily credit repair or if it's more the credit negotiation, credit settlement, the companies that say, in order to get this debt resolved, you need to fall behind. Now, I get it. There's no incentive for the credit card company, the creditor, whoever, to negotiate on a debt that's current. But to then tell people to intentionally fall behind is kind of where I draw the line.
Okay, so debt settlement companies, they're right there with debt collectors in my book. And I'm not a fan of debt collectors, as you can probably imagine from my business model. But debt settlement companies, you're absolutely right, Shawn. My feeling is that I cannot pay my bills on my own. I don't need to pay a third party to not pay my bills. Okay,
that sounds like a really good way to do things.
That just doesn't make sense to me.
I let my wife. That's what I thought. That's why we got married. It's just like, hey, we're not paying the bills this month.
And that's the problem you addressed, and you're spot on. I've seen people who had excellent credit. They were just overwhelmed with the volume of it.
Yeah.
And instead of refocusing, gaining control, creating a plan, which they can do with a great financial coach like George or myself. That's
I'm okay with that. It's all good.
Selfless plug.
Yeah.
They can manage that. But then when they go to a debt settlement company because they hear the ad on the radio or see the thing on the ad on late night TV because they can't sleep because they're overwhelmed.
And we make the best purchases in the middle of the night, right? That's
right.
Exactly. And so then they come to me and say, I've got, on 12 different accounts, I've got 90-day lates. Yeah, that's what happens when you start a debt settlement program.
One of the other things that I've seen with debt settlement is what I've been calling lately, death by 1,000 cuts. So then the problem becomes you've got these 12 accounts that we're all settling, and you've got $50 to this one and $100 to that one and $75 to this one and $25 to that one and $150. And by the time you add it all up, you're, $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 every month in minimum payments because it's these little nibbles to each one.
Right.
That is where they need to go to see you, David, or see you, George, or even if it gets too extreme to then see me for the bankruptcy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're absolutely right. We talked about it a little bit earlier. It's that need for instant gratification, and how people justify it is, well, I can afford that monthly payment. Well, you can until you can't. And, you never know when your company is going to downsize, outsource, merge with another company, whatever that is. And all of a sudden that, living paycheck to paycheck, and now you're missing a paycheck.
Right.
What do you do now? And yeah, you could afford that $350, or actually the average, I think now is $600 a month car payment for 72 months. But you could afford that $600 a month car payment. You could afford the $150 sleep number payment. You could afford the, whatever. Hey, you got to get a good night's sleep somehow.
I can't fault that. David, let me ask one thing as well, because we touched upon a lot of these kind of things. Again, I have a daughter starting college, right? So that's when you're young, what are some of the tips you have for someone who's like, I need to build new credit? What are some of the things that you think for some of the young folks? Because once again, there's so much information out there today. What do you think are some of the 2 or 3 things that say, hey, do this, it'll get you on the right path?
First thing is, I would not buy my kid a new car. Both of our kids, we told them, you save whatever you save will match. And that's what we're doing. We're paying cash for your first car.
Nice.
And then you can save up whatever you want and sell this car. And that's what you can use for your next car. And you get on that cycle so that you never, ever, ever have a car payment. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. I believe in teaching my kids about credit. Mm-hmm. And so both of my kids, we added them as an authorized user on a credit card while they were still in high school. And I did that so that they could learn, okay, this is for emergencies. And when you use it, you have to pay it. And I can still log in because they're an authorized user on my account. And I can see, A, did they use it? And B, are they paying it?
Right.
Okay. Because what happens is when you go off to college, you're 18 and you get that first credit card. And now an emergency is, I need pizza and beer on Friday night.
So that's an emergency.
That is.
It is an emergency. Okay. But now it needs to be paid.
Right.
And that can be very overwhelming. It's amazing. When they were probably 16, 17, that's when we put our kids on an authorized user credit card account.
You reminded me of the story. I've told this a couple times on the show, but my little sister, when she went to college, I remember her calling my dad one night. There's a party tonight. I need a new pair of jeans. It's an emergency.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Your idea of what emergency is kind of changes. And it's having some experience of using a card and paying it makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah.
Okay. And so giving them a little bit of that experience when you can have some control over it, I think is the best route to take, because after a couple of years, when my son went off to A&M, I had him go to our bank. We use USAA, and said, apply for your own credit card now. And he did. And I watched him, and he put, because he's asking me questions, what do I answer for this? And I'm like, well, put that you're a student. Okay. What do I put for income? I don't know. Are you working? No, I'm going to school. Then your income would be zero. They gave him a $10,000 credit limit.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
Okay. As a student with zero income. Unbelievable.
Wow.
But he understood that anything that went on there had to be paid.
Good.
And I wasn't going to pay it.
Well, you can still call the card and say, thank you for the $10,000 limit, but lower it to $1,000, $5,000,
yeah,
$2,000.
I wouldn't do that. Yes, you can, but I wouldn't. Because credit utilization is the biggest single item that you can control quickly.
Right.
It's the second highest piece of the pie when it comes to your credit score. But if he's got a $10,000 limit and decides to take a trip on it and spends, $800, he's still under 10% of the credit utilization ratio.
Right.
Which we could go into a whole nother, I think I told you my wife and I are going to Mexico again in November. It's all going to be paid on points, basically. Okay. Because I have expenses every month, and I look at what credit card offers are out there and what type of sign-on bonus they have and how that's going to help us to travel for free. And this is where it goes back to good credit does not have to equal debt. If I put all my monthly bills on this credit card, I better already have the money in the bank to pay that off.
What a concept.
And that's a conversation that I had with one of my clients because she thought, well, do you have a credit card? I'm like, yes. Well, do you put all your bills on it? Yes. And she goes, well, why can't I do that? And I'm like, you're not ready yet.
Right.
Because you're waiting for your next paycheck so that you can make the payment on that credit card. Whereas I already have that money sitting there to make the payment. There's a distinction there. And she had to learn that distinction so that she could continue to do that.
Yeah, it's more the convenience of I have the money to buy it now. I just don't want to part with that money yet, so I'm going to put it on the credit and then pay off the credit card versus I have to.
I'm going to get it eventually.
The money's kind
of, absolutely. And I always, at a minimum, I pay the statement balance every month so that I don't pay interest on anything. If I have to pay an annual fee, there's a caveat to that, but I'm not a big fan of annual fees. I'm not a big fan of, I'm never going to pay interest. Don't want to do it. The banks make enough money as it is. There are a few credit cards. I'm not always afraid of an annual fee, but this kind of goes into the travel hacking, because if I pay an annual fee and then it pays for my global entry or TSA pre-check or has a huge sign-on bonus that's going to help me travel, that annual fee might be worth it.
Right.
Yeah, which brings up another point is that if you're going to do credit cards, make sure they're rewards credit cards, but make sure that you're paying them off every month because the points aren't going to equate if you allow those cards to accrue interest. You're not going to get the same value in points.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? Any other comments? Anything you wanted to add?
The one thing that I would really, really impart to your listeners is that A, good credit does not have to equal debt. B, credit is not evil. And C, if people would spend nearly as much time on their personal finances as they do on, well, pretty much any other activity.
Social media.
Social media, TV. There is not a Fortune 500 company out there that doesn't look at their financial statement. If you treated your household a little bit more like a business and said, where's our money coming from? Where's it going to? It doesn't take a long time to do that every month, but it can help you really to achieve those goals. And we live in a society right now where everyone wants everything right now. We got to stop that cycle.
Yeah, no, I thought this morning I was making my kids' breakfast and lunch for the day, and I was so happy. My wife was like, "What is going on?" I'm like, I used the end of the ham. I finished off all the chicken. The cheese is all gone on today's lunch. Why is that making you so happy? It's because we don't have to throw it away. It didn't go bad. We used it all. I'm happy.
There you go.
I got nothing on that one. He's like, I'm using the ends of the loaf of the bread. Yay.
You know how much money we waste on groceries? It drives me crazy to throw this stuff away.
I got in trouble, Shawn, the other week because I ate some of my wife's leftovers. And she's all, why'd you eat that? I'm like, because no one else in the family eats leftovers. And I don't want it to go to waste. And she's... But I really wanted those, that particular. I'm like, okay, but historically, the trend would tell me that it's going to sit there for 3 or 4 days and then get thrown away. So what can I say?
Well, you know how I handle that, though, right? You just have seconds on the same time you're having dinner. There's never leftovers. Just eat another meal. That's all good.
Yeah, that leftovers drive me crazy. We have that fight every day in our house as well. So, thank you, David. We really appreciate you being on the show again. To contact David, it is david@omegamoneycoach.com. I'll stick that in the notes. Before we wrap up real quick, I do want to talk about a couple of other things. Our second sponsor, Sam Cohen, he is with Attorneys First Insurance. Sam does malpractice coverage, E&O coverage for attorneys and title companies all over the country. He's got a particular focus on Florida. He's got a particular focus on Texas. And I learned today he's got a focus on Alaska. One day I'm going to have to ask him how he came up with those. I mean, he lives here in Florida, so I get Florida, but I got to figure out how he came up with Texas and Alaska. But if you are a title company, if you're an attorney, if you know a title company or an attorney, you can support the show by referring them to Sam. He's at sam@attorneysfirst.com or www.attorneysfirst.com. Also, today, I hit the button. Actually, last night, I hit the button, and it got approved this morning. Now, as the show comes out, will be about 2-3 weeks from the announcement, but our Patreon page is official, George.
Woohoo!
So for those of you that want to support the show, for those of you that are listeners that subscribe, that listen into the show, thank you, thank you, thank you. We love that. That's really all that we can ask, and it is free to do so. Whatever podcast player you're listening on should be free. If you want to support the show a little bit more than that, you can go to patreon.com. You can search for the Crushing Debt Podcast. We've got different tiers, different levels there where you can support us, whether it's just to throw us a bone and support us, all the way up to buying time specifically with me and George to help you with your problems. So go check out the Patreon page. Again, contact David if you've got questions about credit score, credit repair, credit usage. Contact George for a money coach as well.
We're here to help. That's the line that we always use.
Yeah, we are all here to help. But I think that'll do it for this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast. Thanks again, David. We appreciate you being on the show.
George, Shawn, thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it. Had a great time.
Yeah, thanks. And I think today's episode definitely falls into that we want you as a listener to have more money at the end of the month rather than more month at the end of the money. That'll do it for this week's episode, and we look forward to talking to you on next week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast.
If you have questions that you think would make a great topic for a future episode, please email Shawn or connect with us on social media. Shawn Yesner and Yesner Law, PL, are Florida licensed attorneys. The information contained in this week's episode is not a substitute for legal advice. Your situation may differ, especially if you are located somewhere other than the state of Florida. If you have questions, please contact our office or contact a local attorney. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast.